That morning, the restaurant was at its quietest moment when the door opened with a sharp creak, a sound that broke the peace and sent a chill down the spines of the senior staff. Shoulders tensed, smiles froze. They knew exactly who had just walked in. It was Mr. Arthur Vance, the multi-millionaire businessman who, for years, had behaved as if he owned not just the establishment, but every soul who worked there. His arrival was a toxic ritual. Every Friday, the same table in the back, the same unreasonable demands, the same absence of cordiality. He never said please and never said thank you. For him, the world was a stage for his arrogance, and others were mere extras in his daily demonstration of power. However, on that day, something in the air was different. An unexpected variable altered the equation of fear. The restaurant's owner wasn't in, and the more experienced employees, those who had already learned the complex choreography of submission to appease the tyrant, were busy in the kitchen. The only waitress available on the floor was a newly hired young woman named Natalia. With only 3 weeks on the job, she possessed an aura of respect and serenity. But beneath the surface, there was an integrity that had not yet been bent by the routine of abuse. She didn't know the reverential fear that Mr. Vance inspired. She saw only a customer, unaware that she was about to face the greatest challenge in that small universe. As she approached to take his order, Mr. Vance didn't even look up from the menu, treating her as an insignificant presence. With cutting disdain, he shot out, "Get me a coffee, but don't let it taste like dirty water like last time." The humiliation was instant and public, designed to diminish her. However, Natalia, without losing her composure, simply jotted it down in her notepad and replied with a calm that surprised the nearby tables. "Of course, sir. Right away." Her serenity was not a sign of weakness, but of a quiet, unknown strength in that environment. It was the calm before the storm, the silence of a rope stretched to its limit, about to snap or to play a new tune. An inevitable confrontation is about to happen. If you believe in the courage of those who fight for dignity, subscribe to the channel and like this video to see how silent strength can shake arrogant power. Natalia's strength was not born by chance. She didn't come from a world of privilege, but from a place where dignity was daily bread, often the only plentiful item on the table. The daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, she learned early on the value of honest work and the weight of humiliation. She carried the memory of her father, a man of integrity, being unjustly fired after 20 years of loyalty to a boss who wouldn't even look him in the eye while dismissing him. That scene didn't fill her with bitterness, but with a silent resolution. She promised herself she would never bow her head to arrogance, no matter the price. Her calmness in the face of Mr. Vance was not naivety. It was a shield forged in pain and the pride of her origins. The restaurant, on the other hand, was an ecosystem that had long ago adapted to the poison. Before Natalia's arrival, the place operated under a tacit pact of fear. The employees, many of them heads of households with bills to pay and children to raise, had learned that professional survival depended on subservience. Arthur Vance's weekly visit was an emotional tax they all paid. In exchange for the stability of their jobs, they had become masters of the small rituals of submission, laughing at his unfunny jokes, apologizing for mistakes they didn't make, and enduring his insults with a forced smile. Dignity had become a luxury item, something they saved for when they clocked out and went home. This was the inevitable clash of two universes. For Arthur Vance, the world was a clear hierarchy, and he was at the top. People were instruments for his convenience, and respect was a one-way street, something his money gave him the right to demand. In his bubble of wealth, he had forgotten that waitresses, drivers, and cleaners were human beings. To him, they were just functions, extensions of his desires. Natalia, however, operated with a different philosophy. For her, respect was the foundation of any human interaction, non-negotiable. Waiting tables was her profession, not an invitation to be degraded. It was an exchange of service for payment, not the sale of her self-esteem. The impending conflict was about more than just bad coffee. Minutes later, Natalia returned, moving with the quiet grace of someone who has mastered her profession. She placed the cup of steaming coffee on Mr. Vance's table, a simple gesture that in that environment seemed like an act of courage. The businessman watched her with contempt, picking up the cup as if it were a profane object. He performed a little theater. He sniffed the coffee with a grimace, tasted a minuscule drop, and his face contorted into a mask of exaggerated disgust. Then, with a sudden and violent movement, he shoved the cup, which toppled and spilled the dark liquid across the pristine white tablecloth. The silence of the dining room was shattered by his shout, "This coffee is garbage!" All eyes turned, and the private humiliation became a public spectacle. The entire restaurant held its breath, expecting the standard reaction, a stammered apology, stifled crying, an escape to the safety of the kitchen. But Natalia didn't move. She looked at the dark stain on the tablecloth and then lifted her eyes to meet Arthur Vance's fury. On her face, there was no fear, but a disappointed, almost analytical clarity. And then, in a voice that didn't waver but cut through the tension like a blade, she spoke. "Are you sure the problem is the coffee?" She paused briefly, letting the question hang in the air. "Or could the problem be you?" A dead silence fell. It was a direct challenge, unexpected, a rebellion to suspend reality. For an instant, Arthur was speechless, the shock paralyzing his arrogance. But the moment passed, and his face turned a deep, dark red with pure rage. He leaped to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, his imposing figure casting a shadow over Natalia. "Do you know who you're talking to? Do you have any idea who I am?" He snarled, using the words as weapons. "Everyone here serves me as they should. You're nothing but an insolent brat." Yet Natalia didn't flinch an inch. She held his gaze, the calm on her face transforming into firmness, and with the same tranquility, she returned the affront. "And do you, sir, have any idea who you've run into today?" For the first time, the tyrant was confronted, and the audience saw a crack in his armor. The commotion drew one of the older waiters from the kitchen, a man whose face was already marked by deference. Ignoring Natalia completely, he rushed to appease the beast. "Mr. Vance, 1,000 apologies, please. The girl is new. She doesn't understand how we treat our special clients." In that instant, Natalia felt the true dimension of the injustice. The betrayal came not only from the abusive customer, but from the system itself, which preferred to kneel before power rather than defend the dignity of one of its own. Arthur leaned back in his chair, a crooked smile of victory on his lips. Looking at Natalia, he passed his sentence. "Well, you're going to learn today, and I guarantee this is your last day in this place." The threat was now real, and Natalia was completely alone. The restaurant, once a haven of hushed conversations and discreet cutlery, had transformed into a silent stage. The tension was a physical entity, hanging over the tables, making the food cold on the plates and the wine bitter in the mouth. The other customers, until then mere spectators of a private drama, became part of the scene. Their gazes were no longer of simple curiosity, but of collective judgment. They stumbled over their own whispered conversations as they analyzed every move in the center of the arena. On their faces, a mixture of discomfort, fear, and, for some, a secret admiration for the courage of the young waitress. The air was charged with the energy of something that was long overdue. Arthur Vance's tyranny, once a poorly kept secret, was now an open wound under the spotlights. It was then that a gesture broke the spell of fear that paralyzed the room. A woman, sitting a few tables away, stood up with decisive elegance. She walked slowly toward Natalia, who remained standing, isolated in her dignity. Without a word, the woman took the waitress's hand, a touch that conveyed solidarity and strength. Leaning in, she whispered in a firm voice, so only Natalia could hear, "Don't let him break you." It was about time someone put this kind of man in his place. That act, small in its execution, was gigantic in its meaning. It was the first voice raised. Against the complicit silence, the first proof that Natalia, though betrayed by her colleagues, was not entirely alone in this battle. Arthur's audacity, however, did not diminish. Blinded by his own fury, he bellowed, pointing to the door, "Someone get this insolent girl out of my sight, or I'll do it myself." The physical threat, the final escalation of his arrogance, was the trigger that turned the spectators into active witnesses. Almost in unison, but with the discretion of a subversive act. Several cell phones emerged. The small red recording lights began to blink from different corners of the restaurant. The passive audience had become a network of documentarians. Arthur, in his arrogance, believed he was performing for a captive and frightened audience. Little did he know that his stage was much larger, and his private tyranny was about to become a public and indelible spectacle of shame. Feeling the stares and cameras on him, Arthur Vance decided to double down, turning his fury into a public display of power. He marched to the counter, slamming his fist on the polished wood, the sound echoing through the tense room. "I want to speak to the owner, now!" he ordered the shift manager, who was visibly trembling. Upon being told the owner wasn't there, Arthur let out a cold, humorless laugh. He took out his phone, making a show of it for everyone to see. "Then I'll call his superiors. No one treats me this way and keeps their job. I will personally make sure this brat never serves even a glass of water again in her life." The threat was explicit, a decree of professional ruin for the young woman. Faced with the promise of her annihilation, something in Natalia solidified. She looked at the coffee stain on her uniform, the emblem of the humiliation he had tried to inflict. Her eyes shone, not with tears of defeat, but with the fire of a righteous indignation. She took a deep breath, a deliberate act to anchor her courage, and her voice rang out clear and steady, so that everyone in the restaurant and every camera could hear. "If you intend to destroy me, sir, then do it to my face," she said, each word heavy with integrity. "But don't expect me to stay silent while you try." That was not a sentence of defiance, but a declaration of her own humanity, her refusal to be erased in silence. At the peak of the tension, as Arthur opened his mouth to spew more venom, a voice from the entrance of the restaurant cut through the chaos. A voice that wasn't loud, but possessed a gravity and a natural authority that silenced the room instantly. "What is going on in here?" All faces turned in unison to the door. Standing there was an older man in a light grey suit, leaning on a carved wooden cane. His presence was not physically imposing, but it had an immediate effect. The senior staff straightened their postures, a conditioned reflex not of fear, but of a deep respect. The center of power in that restaurant's universe had just shifted, seismically and definitively. Arthur Vance's face turned pale. He froze, recognizing the newcomer in the same instant. It was Mr. Robert Sterling, the true and discreet owner of the restaurant. But the connection was even deeper and more ironic. Mr. Sterling had been Arthur's business mentor for over 20 years, the man who taught him the fundamentals of success. And here came the seed of the turn, the detail that no one there knew. Mr. Sterling, suspicious of previous reports, had been silently observing his protégé's behavior for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Arthur hadn't just stumbled upon a courageous waitress. He had just walked straight into a trap, patiently set by his own master. The game had irreversibly turned. The plot twist everyone was waiting for has arrived. If you've ever witnessed a situation of injustice and dreamed of the moment of truth, share your story in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the satisfying conclusion that's coming up. Recovering. From the initial shock, Arthur tried to manipulate the situation to his advantage, appealing to the long history he shared with his mentor. He approached with an air of confidence, as if they were both allies against insubordination. "Robert, I'm glad you're here. This newcomer has disrespected me outrageously. You know me. You know I've always been treated as I deserve in this place. I don't know how you allow—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Mr. Sterling silenced him with a simple, imperative wave of his hand, and then, in a voice that brooked no argument, he uttered two words that sealed Arthur's fate. "Sit down." It wasn't a request. It was an order laden with the weight of years of hierarchy, and for the first time, the tyrant obeyed. With Arthur neutralized in his chair, the silence in the dining room was total. All eyes followed Mr. Sterling as he turned slowly toward Natalia. She remained standing, her posture erect, her dignity her only armor, prepared for any verdict. The restaurant owner studied her, not with pity, but with genuine respect in his gaze. "Are you the new employee?" he asked serenely. She simply nodded. Then came the words that changed the atmosphere of the restaurant forever. "Thank you for your courage. Please continue with your work." The short, simple sentence was an explosion of validation, a public endorsement that not only defended Natalia, but redefined the rules of the place. Arthur Vance couldn't believe what he was hearing. His reality, built on the premise that money buys everything, including submission, was crumbling before his eyes. He stood up again, his face distorted with disbelief. "You're going to side with her," he stammered, pointing at Natalia as if she were the source of all evil. Desperate, he played his only card on the table: financial power. "Robert, I've invested a fortune in your businesses. I bring dozens of important clients to this restaurant. She's a nobody, just some waitress." The outburst revealed the poverty of his soul, the twisted belief that his value as a customer gave him the right to be an executioner. It was then that Mr. Sterling delivered the moral checkmate. He approached Arthur, his gaze a mixture of disappointment and glacial firmness. "And you, Arthur, have forgotten what respect means," he said, his voice calm, but each word weighing a ton. He gestured discreetly toward Natalia. "This young woman, in just a few minutes, has shown more integrity and value than you have in the last 5 years. I've been watching you." The public comparison was devastating. "I don't care about your money if it comes with your arrogance. The character of the people who work for me is worth more than any check you can write." Arthur was cornered, judged not by his bank statement, but by his lack of humanity. Defeated on the only field that mattered, that of character, Arthur resorted to his last and most primitive weapon: the threat. "This is a betrayal," he bellowed, his face contorted by humiliation. "You have no idea what I represent in this city. I will destroy this place. No one talks to me like that, not you, not this servant." The word, laden with venom, was the final confession of his worldview. Tired of the spectacle, Mr. Sterling raised his voice for the first time, and his command was final. "Enough, Arthur. If you walk through that door with those threats, you will never set foot in any of my businesses again. As of today, you are banned." And he added the coup de grace. "Your reputation is no longer in my hands, but in the hands of everyone who saw who you really are." Arthur Vance's exit was as graceless as his presence. Blind with rage, he spun on his heel, shoving a chair that fell with a crash. He stormed out without looking back, his pathetic escape being immortalized by a dozen cell phones that were still recording. The moment the door closed, it was as if a years-long spell had been broken. A wave of relief washed over the restaurant, and people let out the breath they didn't even know they were holding. Natalia remained standing, processing the whirlwind of events. That's when Mr. Sterling approached her with a kind smile, offering her a chair. "I know today hasn't been easy, my dear, but I promise you this: as long as I am the owner, no one will ever treat you this way again." In the days that followed, the story exploded. The videos of the confrontation went viral, shared across all social media platforms with captions celebrating Natalia's courage. The narrative was irresistible, the humble waitress who stood up to the millionaire tyrant and won. Newspapers and news portals picked up the case, and the court of public opinion delivered its verdict overwhelmingly. Arthur Vance's name became synonymous with corporate arrogance, his face a meme for entitlement. The image of power he had taken decades to build was demolished in a few hours by his own lack of control, amplified by technology he could not intimidate. He became a caricature of himself. For the restaurant, the consequences were the exact opposite of what Arthur had threatened. Far from being destroyed, the place became more popular than ever. A new clientele began to show up, people drawn not just by the food, but by the story. They came to support an establishment that stood up for the integrity of its employees. Many wanted to meet Natalia, to shake her hand, to leave flowers or a note of encouragement. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It became a symbol of respect and dignity in the workplace. The atmosphere among the staff changed completely. Fear was replaced by a renewed pride and a sense of security they hadn't known. The reversal of fates was complete and poetic. Arthur, desperately trying to do damage control, found that his calls to powerful partners and friends were no longer being answered. His arrogance, which he had considered a tool of power, proved to be a poison that isolated him from the world he thought he ruled. Meanwhile, Natalia was called into Mr. Sterling's office. There, he offered her the position of service coordinator. "This place doesn't need people who obey out of fear, my dear. It needs people with courage like you," he explained. She accepted not for the salary or the status, but for the profound meaning of that trust. Dignity, in the end, proved to be the most valuable asset of all. Months later, the transformation of the restaurant was living proof that the culture of a place is more important than any customer, no matter how rich. The environment, once heavy with anxiety, was now light, filled with the genuine laughter of the team and a shared sense of purpose. Mr. Robert Sterling became a more constant presence, not as a watchful boss, but as the guardian of the new philosophy of the place. And Natalia, in her new role, led by example. She taught new hires that the main ingredient in any dish was respect, and that dignity was the most valuable part of the uniform. The restaurant became a case study, a rare example that financial success could indeed go hand in hand with ethics. Natalia did not become someone else. She remained the simple young woman who had once sought an honest job to pay her bills. However, she now carried the awareness of the impact that a single act of courage could have. One day, the same waiter who had tried to appease Arthur approached her, his eyes misty with a quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Natalia," he said. "Not for what you achieved, but for what you gave back to us. We had forgotten what it was like to work without being afraid." In that moment, she understood that the greatest victory was not defeating a powerful man, but helping other people find their own strength again. Her silent resilience had become a beacon for all those around her. As for Arthur Vance, a more poetic punishment was reserved for him: irrelevance. He didn't go bankrupt, nor was he arrested. It was something worse for a man. Like him, he was forgotten. His name, once whispered with fear, was now mentioned as a joke, an anecdote about arrogance in the age of social media. His threat to destroy the restaurant proved empty. In fact, his actions strengthened it. His attempt to erase Natalia from the map only turned her into a symbol. He, who saw himself as the center of the universe, was undone by a cup of coffee and the calm of a woman who decided she was worth more than the insult she received. The story of that day became a legend whispered between the tables of the restaurant, a reminder that true power lies not in the ability to humiliate, but in the courage to not be humiliated. It showed that systems of abuse, no matter how solid they may seem, are fragile houses of cards that depend on the silence and passivity of their victims. A single breath of courage, a single voice that refuses to tremble, can bring the entire structure down. Dignity, after all, is non-negotiable, and true strength lies not in who shouts the loudest, but in who stands firm in their own truth. For there are gestures that need no noise to echo through eternity. If this story about courage, dignity, and the true strength of character has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you're watching from. We want to know if you also believe that a single act of bravery can change the world.